All right, let's talk about The Acolyte. The show's release on Disney Plus didn't just get people talking, it kicked off a massive online debate. Today, we're going to dive deep into a detailed critique that's been making the rounds, one that offers a really specific take on why the show struggled. It frames the whole thing as a major clash between Hollywood and a big part of its audience. We're going to walk through the core arguments of this critique, piece by piece.
So, what this whole firestorm really boils down to are two completely different stories trying to explain the same thing. On one side, you have the creator's perspective, or at least how the critic portrays it, that the show was unfairly attacked by a campaign rooted in bigotry and bad faith. But on the other side, you have the critic's argument, which is way simpler. The show failed because, well, it just wasn't very good, that it was a poor quality product that didn't land with viewers. For this explainer, we're going to unpack that second viewpoint.
Okay, so here's our game plan for digging into this. First, we'll look at the big picture, the clash between creators and online critics. Then, we're going to zoom in on the specific words and labels that were allegedly at the heart of this fight. After that, we'll get into a counter-argument that involves a pretty serious charge of hypocrisy. Then we'll explore a fascinating idea about fandom being a kind of giant accidental focus group. And finally, we'll get to the bottom line, the critics' ultimate verdict on why the show failed.
So let's kick things off with the foundational conflict here. This critique doesn't see the debate around The Acolyte as just a simple disagreement over a TV show. Nope. It's framed as a symptom of a much larger power struggle playing out between the established Hollywood machine and the super vocal, always online audience that scrutinizes its every single move.
The whole argument really starts with this one simple idea, that when a huge, expensive project flops, the industry's first instinct is to find someone else to blame. They point to online mobs, review bombers, bad faith campaigns, anyone but themselves. The core claim here is that there's a deep-seated refusal to even consider that the problem might be coming from inside the house, whether that's a weak script, weird casting choices, or just a flawed creative vision.
Okay, so from that big picture idea, the critique then zooms in and gets way more specific. It focuses on the actual language that was allegedly used by the show's creator to describe people who didn't like the series. This next part is all about breaking down the labels that, according to this analysis, were used to just brush off all that negative feedback. The first batch of labels that the critic points to are all about money. The claim is that a lot of the show's detractors were just written off as grifters and opportunists. The idea here is that these online commentators didn't actually have a real problem with the show. They were just faking their outrage to rack up clicks and cash in on controversy. Essentially, just pretending to be angry for profit. And here's where the critique claims things escalated, a lot. It says that beyond just questioning their financial motives, the harshest criticism was blamed on pure political extremism. By labeling people fascists and racists, the argument goes you can dismiss any and all creative criticism, no matter how valid, as just being motivated by hate. It's a way to end the conversation before it even starts. Now, this is where the argument takes a really interesting turn. The critic asks a fascinating question. If the goal was to throw every negative label in the book at the audience, why was one very specific one left out? The analysis highlights that the word sexist seems to be conspicuously missing from the list of insults, and that perceived omission? Well, that becomes the key to unlocking the entire next phase of the argument. And that missing piece brings us right to the critic's main counterattack, a direct charge of hypocrisy. Here, the analysis completely flips the script. It stops talking about the online commentators and puts the creator's own professional background and public statements right under the microscope to try and build its case. The critic zooms in on the creator's own production company, Shoot to Midnight. The argument laid out is that the company started with a mission to lift up underrepresented voices in general, but later on it pivoted to specifically seeking out female writers. The critic then uses this to argue that it's pretty hypocritical for the creator to accuse others of sexism when their own company allegedly has gender-specific hiring goals.
Then, things get even more complex. The critic brings up this concept of benign sexism, which is a term the show's creator had apparently discussed before. The analysis focuses on how the creator described it, as a kind of paternal protectionism, this idea that a daughter has to reject her father's world and his guidance in order to find her own way. The critic then connects that theme directly to the show's plot, suggesting it's basically the creator's own worldview playing out on screen.
So after trying to take apart the creator's alleged accusations, the critique does something really clever. It completely reframes the role of the online critics themselves. It suggests that instead of being some kind of destructive mob, maybe there's something else entirely, something that could actually be incredibly valuable. The argument made is pretty bold, that far from being the enemy, these YouTube channels are actually Hollywood's most useful tool.
Think about it. They're basically a massive, free, 24/7 focus group. A single video can get millions of views and tens of thousands of comments, providing instant, unfiltered feedback on what real people are thinking. That's a scale of data that studios could only dream of getting from traditional methods.
Which, of course, leads to the million-dollar question, right? If this constant fire hose of audience feedback is so valuable, why does the relationship between the studios and these creators seem so broken? Why, according to this view, does Hollywood consistently get them so wrong?
And the answer this critique offers is pretty provocative. It suggests the real fear isn't about hate or bigotry. It's about relevance. It's about control. The argument is that studios are terrified of a world where the commentary, the analysis, the video essays, the memes becomes more important and more culturally impactful than the actual shows and movies they're producing. It's a fear of losing their spot as the ones driving the conversation.
All right, this brings us to the finish line of the critique. After wading through all the arguments about culture wars, fandom, and hypocrisy, we get to the bottom line assessment. If you strip all of that away, what are the simple, practical reasons this critic thinks the show really failed? Well, the first reason given is all about the money. This analysis points out that the cost per episode for The Acolyte was reportedly a whopping 27.3% more expensive than Willow, another big Disney Plus show that got canceled. When you're spending that kind of cash, you need a massive runaway hit to justify it. That kind of budget, in this view, made the show a huge financial gamble from day one.
And ultimately, the critic's case for failure is that it really wasn't all that complicated. First, viewership was low. As the source puts it, normal people didn't watch it. Second, it missed the mark, arguing it wasn't aimed at the target demographic of Star Wars. Third, the creative vision was just too specific, described as an unusual and fringe niche perspective that couldn't connect with a mass audience. And finally, the simplest reason of all, in the critic's opinion, it just wasn't a good show. And so we end right here, with the question that sits at the very core of this entire debate. In our modern media world where anyone with an internet connection can become a critic, a commentator, or a creator, who really gets to decide what succeeds? Who holds the power to shape a franchise's legacy? Is it the studio that spends hundreds of millions of dollars, or is it the global audience that watches, talks, and ultimately decides what matters? That's the big question this whole controversy leaves us chewing on.